We work really, really, really hard putting our own things aside to keep it positive, right? Not to bring any of the negativity into the relationship with the boys.
You're listening to the Profit by Design podcast, episode 40. You work hard in your business. On the Profit by Design podcast, we ask the big question. What has your business done for you lately? Hi, I'm Dr. Sabrina Starling, the business psychologist, the author of How to Hire the Best, and your co-host on the Profit by Design podcast. Weekly, my co-host, Mike Bruno, and I bring you tips, tools, and strategies from our own experiences and from the experiences of our guests, who are entrepreneurial thought leaders and real-life entrepreneurs, all to support you in making intentionally profitable and sustainable business decisions to live the lifestyle you desire. Hey, Profit Designers, June is vacation month. I hope you are getting some time away to relax, to enjoy your family, get outside, have a barbecue. If you get the opportunity, go to the beach. And in celebration of vacation month, we are doing a special savings on the Breakthroughs on the Bayou 4-week vacation legacy retreat. As I'm recording this, which is May, we only have 10 spots left at the retreat. And we're doing a special savings in the month of June. If you register for the retreat in the month of June and you mention, I want a vacation, then we will give you a savings on your registration. The early bird pricing is $8,997, but if you register in June, you get in for $5,997. You'll save $3,000 on your retreat registration. So, 4-week vacation legacy retreat happening March 2020. We want to support you in creating a business that runs without you so that you can have more life. I hope you join us. Check us out at 4weekvacation.com. Okay, welcome to the special Father's Day edition of the Profit by Design podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking with Mike Ciavolino, the owner of Shore Creative. He's been with us on the podcast before, and when he was with us before, we talked all about recruitment marketing. But in the course of getting to know Mike over the last couple of years, I've learned some really special things about him with respect to his role as a father, in addition to being an entrepreneur. And we're also going to be hearing from our very own Mike Bruno, who is also a father. He has 3 children. He has a daughter who's 10, a son who's 16, and his oldest son is 18. And Mike Ciavolino, your children are 14 years old. So we have lots of the blending of fatherhood and entrepreneurship. We have lots I think we can get into here. So Mike Bruno, I'm going to kick it over to you to start this off. And I'm just really curious for you in the last year, what are you doing differently as a father? What are you aware of in yourself?
Well, that's a really good question. And, I think the biggest thing that I'm battling with right now is how fast it goes. So with my older son being 18 and going off to college next year, I certainly miss all of the sporting events and, all of the extra activities that I used to complain about a little bit. But it makes me certainly appreciate, the grind, as I call it, because, you work all day and then you have to, grind out everything else and fill a lot of your evenings and weekends with sports. But it's really a special thing. So, for me, it's definitely just been really like a, come to Jesus moment that, these moments are so precious and, the extra work or the extra client meetings and all those extra things should never come in the way of taking advantage of those moments while they still exist, because it does go fast.
It goes so fast. I have a 5-year-old and there's 7.5 years difference between my oldest and my youngest. And when my youngest was born, I thought, oh, I get to do it all again. And this time I'm going to slow down and enjoy it. And it seems like it was just yesterday I was having that thought. And now I'm aware, like, oh, my 5, this is going really fast. And my 12-year-old, it dawned on me the other day, she's going to be 13 in a few months. And somebody said, are you going to do something special for her birthday? And I said, well, it's a birthday. What's the big deal? And they said 13. And that's kind of when it sunk in, like, whoa, She's going to be a teenager here.
Yep.
So, Mike Ciavolino.
Hi.
Hi, you have triplets.
Yes, I do. We do have triplets. Those are our only children. They're 14 years old now. It's been a whirlwind. It's hard to even go back and recall what it was like in the early days. You know, my wife is a nurse by profession, and so that was incredibly useful at the time they came home because they were 8 weeks early. So 2 of them spent 41 days in the NICU, and we had one home, and then we were doing this shuttle thing back and forth. They were 4, 3, and 2.5 pounds respectively at their birth weights. So they all came home on sleep apnea monitors, and they were on 3 different formulas. So my wife actually set up a unit, a hospital unit in our house, and we all had shifts. And I recall I was just starting to, work for myself, which was, a great time to do that. And I would literally, my day would be, I would come home from work at about 7 o'clock. I would eat, I would sleep, and then I would get up at like 10 or 11, and then I would do the overnight shift with the 3 of them. So it's hard to even remember that to where they are now, which are 3, beautiful, growing 14-year-old children.
I would imagine at the time that was going on, it was probably very hard for you to look ahead and see that there would be a time when they're 14 and life would be easier. You might have known it in your head, but when you were in the middle of that whirlwind, it was probably extremely overwhelming.
Yeah, I was, late to become a dad. They weren't born till I was 42. So I had zero experience with, anything but taking care of myself and, just my wife and I doing whatever we were doing. And so it was overwhelming, especially trying to figure out how to get a fledgling business off the ground at the same time.
So where were you in your business? Were you in a startup phase?
They were born, it's funny, their birthday is 1, 2, 3, 4, December 3rd, 2004.
Oh, wow.
In 2003, I was working at an ad agency on Madison Avenue where I'd been for a number of years. And, things in the agency world at that time were really changing. The growth opportunities were sort of drying up. The particular agency I was working for had undergone some new business losses. So things were stressful, and I had feared for my job. The guy I was reporting to left. So I thought, look, I could fail at least as well on my own. I took a few clients and joined a small shop local to us here at the Jersey Shore as my initial sort of flag in the ground. And it was during that time we found out my wife was pregnant with triplets.
Oh, wow. So what did you take from that experience? What lessons did you take from that experience that you feel have served you as a father and as an entrepreneur?
I feel like the most important lesson that I took from that, and I continue to take from that, because as it turns out, 2 of the 3 were then later diagnosed on the autism spectrum around their 2nd and 3rd birthday, respectively, that if we can overcome that challenge, or manage that challenge, I should say, you don't really ever overcome it, but if you can manage that kind of challenge, that kind of stress effectively, then you can manage certainly any barrels that are thrown at you from a business perspective.
So your confidence in your ability to handle what comes your way.
Yeah, I would say.
That's huge. Mike, how about for you? What are some of the lessons that you've learned as a father that have really served you as an entrepreneur?
In my situation, my 2 boys are from a previous marriage. So, there was definitely a tremendous amount of coordination early on when they were younger, because we did have joint custody. So I would have them a couple days a week. She would have them a couple days a week, and then we would share the weekends. So I would pick them up from school, bring them to school. For me, it was extremely important that, one of probably my biggest priority was to make sure that I was purposeful and that I was a big part of their lives. And I was committed to, making the situation as easy as it possibly could be under those circumstances. So, it was really about coordination efforts and scheduling efforts and maintaining a united front with, my ex-wife and her new husband, and, being extremely supportive of the kids and showing up to the sporting events all together and showing that, his mom and, their mom and myself and, her husband and my wife, my current wife, could all coexist at these things and support them as individuals. And I think, that supportive mindset, the coordination mindset, certainly blends into business, that you need to have a united front. You need to, stand together if you have a purpose and you have a why and you have a goal.
Absolutely, because you were so clear, of what your intention is and was at that time. And that helped navigate some very complex situations that you were dealing with.
Exactly. Yeah. And you talked about intention many, many, many times over the years that we've known each other. And, I think, focusing on the intention, right? And then putting the pieces to the puzzle around that. So if if you know what you want, you can achieve it.
Right. And even if it doesn't go smoothly, the people that you love know what your intentions are, and that can go miles for making things work better overall.
Right. And also with the understanding that in a situation like that, you are going to have some behind the scenes, I'll just call it bickering, right? But there's certainly relationship difficulties when you're in a divorce situation. And, we made a very clear choice in the beginning to keep that behind the scenes and not have it affect the children. And that was really important to me. I didn't want any of my decisions to impact them in a great way. I'm sure, they have been impacted by it, but, we worked really, really, really hard putting our own things aside to keep it positive, right? Not to bring any of the negativity into the relationship with the boys.
Yeah. One of the things that's impressed me about both of you, Mike and Mike, is the tremendous responsibility that each of you feels in your role as father in the family, and how seriously you take that obligation and how that has played into the decisions you have made and are making about your businesses. So I would love for both of you to speak to that a bit.
Sure. It really lends itself into what your why is, what your purpose is for getting up every day. I felt for a long time I could never achieve any of the goals in my life, whether it be financial or spiritual or otherwise, working for somebody. But then when the kids came along and the needs that I have, my daughter, for example, is, she's 14, as I stated, she's nonverbal and she needs assistance with, she's significantly delayed. So it's almost like having a 14-year-old toddler in a lot of ways. She needs assistance and attendance with everything from dressing to, she needs to be watched constantly. There needs to be alarms on the doors, really everything. She uses a talk pad for speaking. And, what she's ultimately going to need, and my biggest fear every day is that, hey, someday I'm not going to be here. And a lot of parents with kids on the spectrum say, what the hell are we going to do when we're no longer on this earth? How are these kids going to survive? Because you hear these horror stories about the homes for these kids where there's abuse and neglect and things like that. And so, we're both dedicated to ensuring that that is not the path that she ultimately winds up with. And it's frightening. And my other son, my heart breaks for him sometimes because he's very high functioning. He's a really smart kid, but he's got delays and he's on the spectrum. So he just doesn't quite fit in, and he so desperately wants to. So, and then making sure that, from a mental perspective, that my typical kid, who lives in this sort of insane asylum, if you will, every day, is, healthy and able to have his own path. So those things fuel me to make sure that that's all straightened out when it's all said and done.
Well, and just the difference in the needs in the way that you and your wife are being called to show up as parents in the world, and the different challenges that you're navigating for them. And, the worry for the future for your daughter that you have, I think that is such a huge responsibility to sort out. like how that's going to be handled and who's going to watch over her and make sure she's well taken care of in the way that you want her to be taken care of.
Right, exactly. That's what sort of drives me every day.
And then the other piece of it that you're highlighting is that you have your other son who you're trying to give a fairly normal teenage experience to, and yet he's living in a household with siblings who have very high needs from both you and your wife. And on one hand, I'm sure he's learning some tremendous life lessons himself in all of this. And on the other hand, you're aware that his experience is very different than what his peers are experiencing.
You're 100% right. He's definitely, and he doesn't even realize what he's taking away from this. It'll serve him later on in life, which I'm grateful for, even though he doesn't really know it yet. But, we've sent him and continue to send him to a sibling support group just so he can go and, talk it out without his parents, so to speak. So you are 100% right. Just making sure I have, Nick time, just time for him and his dad without, the stresses of being home where someone might be having a meltdown or someone might be doing something that's inappropriate or embarrassing him. So yeah, that's as important as the day-to-day of taking care of the other two.
So that one-to-one time, I want to touch on that briefly. That's really hard to come by I think in most circumstances, because, you're dealing with a situation where you have triplets. So getting one-to-one time with each of the children, I'm sure is very challenging. Mike, you're very busy, and I know you work very hard to get one-to-one time. I have a hard time making that happen in my world, and my kids love it when I can do it, but it is so rare.
They love it. Like, for example, I took Nick to a concert the other night or last week, and he's still, it's just he and I, we took the train, we went up to Newark, saw a show he wanted to see, and he's still glowing about it. So, that makes me happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the drive, I think, comes from, one of my core values, I guess, which is to be a provider. And I don't mean it in a, kind of like masculine sense, like a sense of, I want to be the be all end all husband of the house or the man of the house type of thing, because, my wife is an integral, more of an integral part to the success of our family and our house than I believe I am. But I think when we were talking to another guest, Chad, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the feeling of, or the lack of self-worth at certain points. And, as a child and a younger adult, I just never felt that I was good enough for certain things. So, in my mind, I always wanted to be, the helper, the fixer, the provider. And, there's many days where, I've struggled with, the stress and the overwhelm and, why am I continuing to go to work and do these things? And, and then it kind of triggers back to, I'm doing this because I want to be able to provide for the people that I love and the people that are around me. And it doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that's somewhat materialistic, but, I'm driven to be successful so that I can share that success with others. And it's not just the monetary side, it's just also for myself. So I feel like I'm much more centered, when I am in a successful environment and there's a lot of momentum and there's positive overwhelm and things are moving in a good direction. And I think that positivity in my attitude then, kind of overflows, to the people around me instead of being a negative person, but certainly I take being a father and a husband very seriously. I don't take it for granted. I feel like it's a gift, like I've been given a gift to have this opportunity to do that, and, it just really is a big part of who I am. It makes me, keeps me grounded and just makes me feel like I have a purpose.
Yeah. Wow. So Mike, if you, and this is for Mike Bruno, but I also want to hear from you, Mike Ciavolino, on this. If your daughter, Mike, were describing you to us, what is your sense of how she experiences you as a father?
Well, I would probably say that she thinks I'm funny. I think she thinks that I'm trusting, that I'm a strong person for her, that I show a lot of love for her. I mean, like yesterday was her birthday. So May 9th was her birthday. We're recording this right now on May 10th. And, I picked her up and hugged her and I said, I just want to tell you how much I love you, how important you are to me, how proud I am of you and all that you've accomplished, all the things that you do. I'm your biggest supporter. And if you ever need anything, you come to me. And I put her down and looked at her face, and she was just like, looked like she was almost about to tear up, but she was just smiling, like ear to ear, and like was just staring at me, like almost didn't even know what to say, but she really heard it all.
She was taking it in, Mike. She was in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but she is 10, so who knows what she would say if you asked her the question.
Well, I think you probably have a pretty good sense of how she's experiencing you. Mike Ciavolino, how about you? If we were talking to your son, what is your sense of how he would describe you and your relationship with him and how you show up in his world?
So the boys roll their eyes at me a lot of times because so to tell you this now, I need to sort of back up a little bit. I told you initially that I started working at a small shop in 2003. The kids were born in 2004. In 2008, when they were 4 years old, I opened up Shore Creative Group. And we were in the middle of that wonderful recession at the time. And, things got really, really bad. We had to sell our house that we were living in with the 3-year-olds to move to a smaller, more affordable house. And the stress and strain on our relationship was, I can't even tell you, it's amazing that, we're still here today, to be quite honest, mostly a testament to my wife than to me. And I had gone through a period there where I was making some really poor decisions and got involved in some destructive habits, like even drinking too much to cope with the incredible amount of stress I was feeling, the overwhelm, the inability to deal with either my professional or personal life or even know what to do first. And, thankfully, ultimately, I sort of rebounded from that and, took a more positive approach to life in a lot of different ways and to my business and started to get my arms around all the situations. And personal and professional development became a big part of that, reading, listening to podcasts, fitness, things like that. And so I started imparting these things to the kids, and I'll put notes in their lunch boxes. And, you're 100% responsible for all your own actions, those kinds of things. So they roll their eyes at me now when I come to them with a book that we're all going to read together, like Jack Canfield's Success Principles for Teens and things like that. I think they know I'm coming from the right place, but they're like, come on, Dad, I just want to play video games.
Yeah, but I totally get that. On one level, I think we as a parent, we have to deal with it. They are just teenagers and their flip responses sometimes to the things that we want them to take in. But on the other hand, I know they're getting it. Like what they're watching us and how we conduct ourselves. They're watching what we read. They're watching what we listen to, and they're watching us grow. And the reason I'm asking both of you this question, it's prompted by something that happened for me last night with my oldest daughter. Yesterday at school, they had the middle school graduation. And I think she sat in and watched the middle schoolers, and apparently they each stand up and give a speech. And I think the speech is about what their parents have meant to them or something along those lines. And she said, Mom, I'm crafting my speech already. And this is what I'm going to say. She said, I'm going to say that I'm here because my mom pays for my education. And I'm here because my mom encourages me and she sees the good in me, even when I struggle, and points all that out. And it just got me thinking about, I want to be so careful what I say and do, because they're taking this all in, the good and the bad. But what really impressed me is I've certainly made a lot of mistakes, and I'm sure you guys have too in your parenting, that's not what's standing out in her mind, though, overall. It's the bigger picture of the good, the intention that we have as we parent them.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And that's so true. They're watching every move, sort of that I make. So, you can't be hypocritical and say, well, work on yourself in this way or do this for yourself. If you're not doing those things, if you're losing your temper, if you're losing control, if you're doing things that, aren't in line with what you're sort of not walking the walk, They're watching every single thing that you do. So if you drink too much, or if you lose your temper, or are laying on the couch or doing something that's, not productive, how can you then go and ask them to, because we're their first role models. So it's something that we have to take, very, very seriously.
Absolutely. Yeah. What are some of the hardest things that you've experienced being a father and a business owner?
I'll jump in. So, certainly I think it's certainly time management. So, when my sons were younger, I definitely, I would say for the first, 2-3 years, didn't understand that I needed to put work outside of the normal work hours. I'm saying, not work in general, but after, 8-9 hours a day, I need to put it aside and I need to concentrate and be present for them. By the time my daughter was born, I was a little bit more conscious of it. I'm not saying that I did it all the time, but, it's something that I've battled with and struggled with, is being present. So I have to, I certainly worked on that over the years, and I still struggle with a certain amount of personal guilt when I'm not working. It's a weird thing for me, but, I have to quickly snap myself out of it when I'm around, my kids and my wife, and, we're at family events and we're doing things as a family. So, that's been definitely a difficult thing for me to manage, and I'm still managing it, but I think I'm doing a pretty good job of it. It's just, it's a struggle.
What it's making me think about, when Danielle and I did the Mother's Day edition of the podcast, we talked about the personal guilt that we experience, but I think we as women experience it in the opposite direction. And I don't want to make stereotypical statements. I'm going to speak from my experience. My experience is that the guilt comes in that I am working and that I'm not being present with the kids. Whereas you're describing the guilt coming in when you aren't working and you're trying to be present with the kids.
And my wife and I certainly have discussions about that, because she has those same feelings that you have.
Yeah.
Whereas, we see our daughter rapidly, she's rapidly growing, and, it's definitely something to balance, right? Because a lot of times she just wants to say, screw this, I don't want to work anymore because I want to be able to have more time with my daughter. But, obviously you can't do that. So it is hard to manage, and I'm sure the burden of the guilt is equally shared. It's just distributed differently.
Yeah, it's there. And so that question of the guilt, like, what purpose is this guilt serving? And for myself, I can't identify a good purpose for this guilt in my life, other than it keeps me aware, highly aware, that I have two very important roles that I'm walking through, and trying to show up and be present in both of them in a very effective and impactful way. And so I really don't like the word balance, because there is no balance in any of this. But for me, it's about, how do we show up and have impact in these important roles, and really be the best that we can be for the people who need us, either on the business side or in the family. Mike Ciavolino, how about for you? What have been some of the hardest or the biggest challenges in the two roles?
Time management is the biggest thing. Again, my daughter when 14, a lot of times you can leave a 14-year-old, they can be home alone. They can get themselves a snack and do their own thing when they get home from school. But it's not the case here. We need to be home for Michael and Frankie, especially her. So she gets off her bus at 3:00. Someone needs to be here in the house, whether it's my wife or myself, or, unfortunately, sometimes we have to rely on her parents who, they're older, and that's something we try to avoid as much as we can, because my daughter is hard to manage. So I know that every day, or at least a few days a week, at 3:00, I'm not going to be available for a call or a new business meeting, or being anywhere, or working on anything, writing, or anything related to the business. And then also, the morning, it's a really it's still a 2-person job, getting everybody dressed, getting lunches made, getting them out the door. So, that part of the day is blocked off too. So it's not, the last thing it is a 9-to-5 role. You find yourself, and I'm sure you guys do too, you're doing stuff late at night, or you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to carve out blocks of time where you can focus on being productive and still be able to, manage the day-to-day of the house. And that's really it's a massive challenge for me, but I think I'm getting better at it. I hope so.
I think that's such an important point, because on the one hand, as entrepreneurs, we're so lucky that we can determine our own schedule for the most part. And at the same time, that presents that we're working at very strange hours of the day and night, because we are taking advantage of that flexibility and showing up and doing things with our kids. May is a terrible month in my world with respect to balancing school activities and my schedule. And I constantly am having curveballs thrown at me that there's this school event or that school event. But I've got 5 meetings scheduled, and now we have to juggle and move meetings around and make it happen. And then like yesterday, I was awake at 2:30 in the morning, not because I wanted to be, but because I couldn't figure out, my brain was just going like, there's things that have to be done, and how does this get accomplished? And I think sometimes what's different for parents who are doing a typical 9-to-5 job, that you may not have as much flexibility around that, but you're also not doing as much of the juggling of the time management.
Right. When a parent in that situation, not to minimize what anybody else does, but, in a lot of ways, the 3 of us and others like us are envious, because when they're off the clock, they're off the clock. The job's done. But, that's never really the case for a business owner. So the constant juggle is the challenge.
Yeah. So I'm curious, for either of you, have you ever, worked and brought your kids into your work? I know, Mike Bruno, you've had your son do some work for you during the summers. How have you navigated that?
Sure. The funny thing is that some people, may think that it's odd or frown upon it. But I mean, I remember even as my first son was probably like 5, 6 years old, and I would be working on a weekend, and, I'd have him in an excavator with me as we were digging trenches, and, the clients always got a kick out of it, and even when the hurricane hit and they were off school for, probably a few weeks or more, he worked every single day with me, 12, wow. 14 hours a day. And, so I always tried to instill, extremely hard work ethic in the boys, and my daughter too, but, they had more opportunity to come to job sites and, to do that kind of thing. But, I never frowned upon at all having them come and see what I do, or, kind of understand, why things are chaotic in my world and what my drive is about. My father was a really hard worker, and, even after work, we always did stuff around the house, and I always helped him with it. And, we were always moving and grooving and doing something. And, I always wanted to show my kids the same exact thing.
What you just said there about they get to see why things are chaotic in my world, I think that does give them, when they come into our work in whatever capacity they do, and they get that inside glimpse of what it's like on the other side, I think that's so important for them to have that understanding. My oldest daughter, when we did the retreat this last year, she was very helpful in just getting things together before the retreat, helping me in that way. But I also let her attend the VIP day with John Bates, and she sat in and essentially audited that, because I really felt like her getting to learn from John Bates was way more valuable than anything she would ever get probably in 6 months of school. And the things that she took in, and just being around the business owners, the attendees at the retreat, I think she really got an understanding at a very different level of my why, and why I do what I do, and why it's so important. And I don't think if I were to sit there and try to explain that to her, I could ever put it into words where she would get it on the level that she got it, because she showed up and participated in that way. Mike Ciavolino, have you incorporated and brought your kids in to work or done anything like that?
Yeah. So with the boys, Nicholas, my typical kid, he's not that interested in what I do for a living, other than, hopefully facilitating whatever he needs me to buy for him. I had a speaking gig locally here. So I said to myself, and he was off from school that day. I said, I'm bringing him because I wanted him to see sort of what I did or have a snapshot into sort of what goes on and what I'm trying to do. And I brought him, and it was, valuable. That he enjoyed because he likes, he was the star in the school play. So he likes the whole acting thing. And so he appreciated that. I brought him to the office once and he was bored to tears. Whereas, Michael, my son who's on the spectrum, is thrilled by the idea that he thinks I'm the boss. You're the boss, Dad. No one is your boss. Well, I'll say to him, clients are the boss, Michael. And I did bring him to a meeting one time with a group that I knew was sort of friendly to his situation. And he was, went into his usual thing, just interrupting the meeting, asking people, who's your favorite Monty Python character? And do you play Minecraft? So he's excited about sort of what it is, isn't quite sure exactly what it is.
Yeah, I think that's really, it's fun when we have those opportunities to include our kids, because it's not always, and you're right, you have to pick the right situation when you're going to bring them in. I certainly wouldn't have my daughter, she wanted to attend the entire retreat, and I had to tell her, no, as much as you love these business owners, they want to be able to talk about adult things without you around and adult issues. And then, of course, she's totally curious, like, what do you guys talk about at the retreat, Mom? And I'm like, oh, it's not like that kind of stuff. But, I think just that opportunity when we're selective and they can see into our worlds is pretty unique. I'm also wondering, I would love to hear from both of you, what it is that you hope your children are learning from you about entrepreneurship. And Mike Bruno, I'm going to ask you that first.
I think first and foremost, they know that it takes some grit, it takes perseverance, and it takes hard work to make things happen. It's not a get rich quick scheme for sure. And, there's certainly some school of hard knocks that goes into it. But, I was thinking about this the other day that, at any point in my kids' lives, if they wanted to strike out on their own and have their own business, I certainly wouldn't discourage it. I would just, give them some tips, I guess, around, getting aligned with the right people and coaches and groups and, really, that I think is the biggest shortcut, is not trying to do everything on your own and having an understanding that, investing in self-improvement and just surrounding yourself by people is, saves years and years and years and years, but certainly, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, so I will never tell them not to do it.
So do you feel like you hope that they become entrepreneurs, or do you feel more neutral to whatever they choose, they choose?
I think, at this point, I feel a little neutral. I mean, I feel a little bit of both. So it would excite me if they did, because I feel like that I could help them. But, I would also want them to make the right decisions and have, a plan and be able to execute it properly. So it's kind of both, I kind of hope that they do, because I think it would be fun for me also. But, it's a little bit of both.
And Mike Ciavolino, how about for you?
I would definitely want them to pursue a path of being an entrepreneur. Just from my perspective, the sort of brick and mortar scene is obviously, as we know, is in transition. I mean, what is a quote unquote secure job or career path these days? I don't know that exists anymore. It's, ultimately, whether you work for someone or whether you work for yourself, it's going to come down to, you management, what you do, how you manage yourself, how you grow yourself personally and professionally, how you can add value to either your employer or to your clients, if that's the path you choose. So the fact that, as you guys know, the ultimate having to look in the mirror is being an entrepreneur, because it consistently shines a light on where the shortcomings are in your game and where you need to improve. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. I like that aspect for them if that's something that they wanted to pursue.
Yeah. So I'm sitting here just thinking about, for both of you, I'm really curious if you were talking to someone who is either brand new as a father or brand new as an entrepreneur, or maybe kind of like Mike Ciavolino, your situation, brand new to both at the same time. What are some words of wisdom that you wish someone would have shared with you?
Wow. I would say, it sounds trite, but take one day at a time. Act like, it's almost if you're driving a car in the fog. And so you can only see a little bit in front of you. And, if it's a situation where you have a special needs kid, try not to get too overwhelmed with the situation. Try to, as Mike said earlier, utilize coaches and people who can help you and tap into as many different sources for help and learning as you can.
Yeah. So for me, when we were talking about the guilt thing a little bit earlier, you and I had a discussion many, many months ago, might have even been over a year ago now, about, the stereotypical, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to be like this, right? So you need to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You need to do. And I think that some of those, very, there's statements that are put out there, right? And I think we talked about it too, like if you Google the word entrepreneur, right, the 10 things that come up of the definition of an entrepreneur, are very frightening, kind of life taking over words, right, and actions. So I think, you can be an entrepreneur while being responsible and doing some of those things, but certainly don't have guilt over spending time with your baby, your young children, your old children, because at the end of the day, and this is the cliche saying, you're never going to say, I'm so glad I spent all that time with that client or getting that extra contract and I didn't spend time with my children. At the end of the day, the moments that you're passing up, the moments that you could experience are way more important for the end game. So, just focus on that and the rest will click into place.
Well, you both have shared some very powerful words of wisdom here. And as we close this out, I really want to invite our profit designers to jump into our Facebook group and share the stories and the experiences that today's episode has gotten you thinking about. Because I know when we released the Mother's Day edition, I mean, within hours, I started getting messages in different places of people sharing, you said this and it made me think about that. And then when you said that, it made me think about this. And I think that it's just in our Profit by Design Facebook group, we have a really rich opportunity to really, as you're listening to these podcasts and it's triggering things in you, you don't have to talk about them alone in your car while you're driving and you're listening to the podcast. You can jump into the Facebook group and share and really be a part of the conversation. And that, for me, it furthers my learning, and I see it for our profit designers too. Like, we're all learning together. So Mike and Mike, Jersey in the house here, both of you. Thank you so much for doing this special edition of the Profit by Design podcast for Father's Day.
Thank you so much for having me on, Sabrina. It was quite an honor, and it was really cool to be able to talk about this. It's not something I often get to do. I would love the opportunity to help other sort of entrepreneur folks who have kids on the spectrum, and that sort of whole aspect of managing your business and your life.
Yeah. And Mike, you're in our Facebook group, you interact. So if anyone wants to reach out to Mike Ciavolino, that's one of the easiest places to find him to have that discussion.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for sharing everything. Thanks for pulling everything out of us, Sabrina.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You guys did great. All right. Talk with you later.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Sabrina.
All right. Thank you.
Bye. This episode of the Profit by Design podcast has been brought to you by Tap the Potential, the home of How to Hire the Best and the 4-Week Vacation. Don't forget, month of June, mention I want a vacation and you'll save $3,000 off your early bird registration for the 4-week vacation Legacy Breakthroughs on the Bayou Retreat happening March 2020. Check us out, 4weekvacation.com. Thank you for spending time with us today. Join our conversation in the Profit by Design podcast Facebook group. Share your thoughts on today's episode, ask us questions, and let us know what you want to hear about next. Visit our website at profitbydesignpodcast.com to access resources from our sponsors and tools we've created for you. Subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening to right now. There's a subscribe button right there. Go ahead and hit it so that you always get a notification when we release a new episode. And finally, share our podcast with a friend if you know a friend who would enjoy it. Thanks again for listening. This is real life business. Keep your chin up, keep moving forward. You got this.